If there's one thing we don't associate with animation, it would obviously be realism itself, because why would you expect such an idea to appear when its goal is to be real rather than what is evidently portrayed in a way that's not physically possible to real life standards, hence why live action remakes even exist to justify itself and make these supposedly fake situations into reality. This is the entire mindset going into films like Lion King that tried photorealistic animation but also failed at being great at it. Where you have to mention facts like this because it actually was used by Disney Animation itself with real landmarks for one of their most forgotten films of all time, which happens to be the 2000 film Dinosaur, the semi-live action and mostly animated film produced by the studio itself rather than what you would have thought being produced by their live action studio considering how real this story tried to be. A unique twist on the entire Disney formula released during the same exact time as The Emperor's New Groove. A film that most of us Disney fans remember far more than this one, actually despite the knowledge that it made way more money compared to The Emperor's New Groove, which actually underperformed at the box office until its home video release. But like some other people, I have never really given this film any attention at all, just passing it by on most occasions since it didn't really feel like it belonged to the studio, thinking that their literal live action division would have thought this idea was possible during that time of their films. Just not looking interesting enough because they did work on The Emperor's New Groove and Fantasia 2000 beforehand, which are all vastly different in terms of quality being 2D films and not 3D. Which, speaking about that, this film really jump-started that era to switch to more computer 3D animated films from the early 2000s to the present day. And although I'm not the biggest fan of this film and originally thought it to be boring to watch compared to an endless catalog of expressive characters in the cartoonish sense, it's still definitely not the worst thing that Disney has to offer, and in some cases has a lot to like about it, where some of the lines of the characters do live on in present day Disney when it comes to their themed shows in parks or whatnot, inspiring the smallest things to make the biggest changes of all. But before we start, where did such an idea come from? Why in fact did Walt Disney Animation Studios in the year 2000 decide with such a radical idea that you wouldn't expect them to do? Sure, you could see them make an animated dinosaur movie, but actually not one of this caliber. Of course, you did have their own former animators back in the late 80s team up with Spielberg before he made Jurassic Park with an animated movie of their own called Land Before Time, where it's just easier to see why they waited on such an idea or other things to differentiate other than the fact that they were focused on human princess stories. In fact, this idea started way back in the 80s by a special effects artist producing a go-motion animated film about dinosaurs, where the original idea was planned as a stop-motion feature that was actually pitched to Jeffrey Katzenberg, who really didn't think there was much interest in the idea to justify the original budget, but how Disney still took up upon the project to work on a film about dinosaurs in a realistic style. And that's where Walt Disney Feature Animation started to develop the film themselves, back in the mid-90s after films like Lion King, and decided to go digitally as films like Jurassic Park came out, doing something different than what you would expect, like the decision to film real live action backgrounds for the characters to roam around, which is wild to see that this film is actually partially live action and more than what The Lion King could ever say except for its 2-second opening shot, with CGI dinosaurs and all that is more expressive than could ever be seen. The project was then greenlit, but only at the insistence of Michael Eisner that the dinosaurs would actually talk since it still is their Disney film, to which a Disney film of this caliber has to be scored by none other than James Newton Howard himself. Mentioning this short fact since we already covered Raya, which is the first film he scored since he did Atlantis, having a knack for these ancient historic settings that Disney actually does a good job at, enough to the point where they thought it was a good idea to theme one of their attractions at Animal Kingdom to Dinosaur itself, where it even had some video cameo of the characters, where it originally was named Countdown to Extinction. One that probably most people never even knew or to think about connecting to a movie in one way, since most tend not to think about it, or even the fact that it's not really based on the movie itself and it's just going to be replaced by an Indiana Jones attraction in the next few years, leaving an end of an era. But still, an era that existed millions of years ago, traveling back to that time in the age of the dinosaurs. Here in this movie, we focus on this egg in the nest of iguanodons who watch it carefully until a predatory carnotaur comes to feast, managing to kill a Pacnorhinosaurus. All names I will probably be getting wrong for the rest of the film because of how long they have to be, or just never into scientifically named dinosaurs. But fortunately, one iguanodon egg is left to get stolen, trying to get eaten by various other creatures until slipping up traveling across the real terrain and footage that they captured on camera until it comes on an island filled with prehistoric lemurs. Like, just to pause before continuing this story, it's still wild to me that a Disney animated film went out of their way to film real locations. Like, that's real water splashes here, trees, rocks, and everything you can think or find in a real natural environment. They went out to film places like California, Florida, Hawaii, and Jordan to put each scene into perspective of where they travel to, and it does really look good, for the most part, until you realize the CGI characters exist, which again are still way more expressive than the Lion King movies combined. Unfortunately, with that information, there was an accident when they filmed the film back in California where a crew member died and another one was injured, with the equipment striking a power line, suing Disney for the damages and fined for safety violations, meaning not everything was tip-top shape in making the film the way it was. Of course, they still made it the way it was to capitalize off of the initial Jurassic Park success that Universal had a good time making in the late 90s, if you even wondered if they wanted to hold off such a film until Lion King era technology was made to make these environments digitally possible. But for what it is, it does make this film unique and untouchable by live action standards at the very least. But back to the story, these group of lemurs decide to raise this baby iguanodon for themselves and name him Aladar, despite the older Yar's concerns compared to his own daughter. So the next couple years, Aladar gets raised in this lemur colony on the island, growing to be a big dinosaur with a good heart, playing with his adopted family who enjoys his company. This takes place during the time of a lemur mating ritual where Aladar's brother Zini seeks to find a mate but miserably fails, where you do tend to notice how this does still feel like a Disney film by the way that the characters act, where it has that weird story charm that you know exists there while still being vastly different, and that's actually a good thing for the film's advantage. Still, again, I won't say it's the strongest story nor the one that interests me the most greatly, but I can applaud its apparent effort to be this unique. But after the ritual ends unsuccessfully, a meteor shower starts to appear where an asteroid hurtles down to Earth. Of course, this isn't the asteroid that killed all the dinosaurs, obviously, as we still got an hour left of this film, but one that causes mass destruction regardless, where the family has to leave since most of their colony has been reduced to ash. So with the remaining survivors, they travel back towards the mainland in search of a new place to live, getting caught up in a herd of dinosaurs in search for the new nesting grounds after this disaster, where new eggs can hatch and life is free from predators. The herd here is led by the callous Kron, as an iguanodon who only cares about the strong over the weak to survive. He happens to be played by Samuel Wright, who most of us actually know him as Sebastian, the Jamaican crab from Little Mermaid, where you would have never guessed that by his voice being this gruff as a leader compared to the fun Jamaican accent he had. Like, I have to give him credit for this portrayal as that leader being uncaring for the most part, except for survival of the fittest, to contrast with Aladar as the protagonist who seeks to help everyone. A nice twist to see what he can do as an actor. He is also joined with his sister Nira, who has a softer heart for those she meets like Aladar, as we will eventually see them grow to become love interest. Aladar and his lemur family eventually befriend one of the dinos at the back, as the ones who are deemed to be the weakest and the ones that can be let off the easily, helping them on their journey as Kron demands they move faster. They travel for days across this brutal desert with no water and food until they reach this certain spot that's all but dried up, all the while being slowly hunted by the predatory groups like the Carnotaurs we saw at the beginning on the trail for them. This is where Aladar gets to shine over the social Darwinist leader, where he discovers water beneath the dirt, which seems to impress Nira for his skills actually helping out the herd, compared to Kron, who lets the weakest die off, and actually one he doesn't like being usurped by a lower level iguanodon who is only raised by lemurs. It's all events that lead Nira to grow more closer with Aladar, which impresses the lemurs, who exactly wanted this happen since the mating ritual was something good for Aladar's species. But on the other side of things, Kron's second in command, Bruton, gets attacked by the Carnotaurs as they eat another dino and wound him greatly. It's an event that catches the attention of Kron, who wants everyone to keep moving and leaving the slower ones behind, like Aladar's protest, who wants to stay with them, meaning the injured Bruton, who accepts them into their smaller crew, patching him up, which changes his perspective on these types of dinosaurs. Because, as the lieutenant of Kron, he initially believes that the strong survival is more important, who care not for the lesser dinos until they patch him up, and tells them that it's really a choice to make to either die or live. And even though it's a change, it's a short-lived one since the Carnotaur still followed them there and almost get Aladar until Proudhon himself sacrifices him so the others can escape. A dino who could care less about the other back of the pack but ends up behind in order to save them first, managing to take one out as he dies too with his wounds by the falling rocks on the ceiling. Aladar on this other hand, by the sacrifice, almost gives up when they reach a dead end in the cave until Baleen talks him out of that not doing so and pushing further until the rocks break to reveal the nesting grounds once and for all. A beautiful green paradise filled with abundance for all to enjoy, while the rest of the herd are still stuck on the other side searching for the way in. This is actually where they discover a landslide originally destroyed the original entrance, which can only result in them falling to their deaths if they climb over, and causing Aladar to run back on the other side to warn them even at the cost of the angry Kron. Where even we see him still want to continue to push on over the top despite what we know now, since he can only care for himself and his one objective until faced with the darker reality, where Aladar also discovers the last Carnotaur still alive trying to chase the rest down. He arrives in time to actually warn everyone about this and say they could get to the other side, but Kron refuses to listen, wanting to charge attacking Aladar until his sister finally stops him as he leads everyone to the other side before the Carnotaur chases them back. An event where Kron still climbs up slowly, but Aladar rallies all of them together to scare it back, which they successfully evade the Predator, who instead aims for Kron, who still persists in his own death, and he almost does get eaten by the Carnotaur until both Aladar and Nira come back to save him and finally push the big dino to his death. Yet, how they were still too late, as his injuries were too great to even overcome, succumbing to these wounds, finally ending his life in a sad way that pushed too hard. That after everything he tried to do and posture himself as, it still resulted in his untimely demise, as survival of the fittest can only come back down to the weakest, managing to make it back to the top. Aladar finally then comforts Nira as they make it back to the grounds, as the rest of the herd is finally safe once and for all. A great victory for all of them to celebrate, as more lemurs finally appear and Aladar and Nira's children are born into this world, continuing life and celebrating it for the better once more. It ends things finally on the hope that more changes are on the way, but with the hope that they were remembered well for what they accomplished. So all in all, this was kind of a short fun recap of the journey of dinosaurs, where I really didn't have much to say about it as expected from the start of rewatching this film. I know that probably seems disappointing to many of you as it did myself, but I also realize it's a movie that isn't bad for what it is. Pretty decent to watch, actually, but still not the strongest thing they could ever make compared to all of their other works. Admitting that it's a film that isn't for me for my personal taste and what was attempted for this era of dinos, but I still appreciate those who like this journey. A very simple journey with a character leading the way for everyone to survive compared to just some, in terms of specific people on the food chain of course, and the survival of the fittest. Where even though he may not be remembered as a Disney hero, or even I didn't remember him until watching these movies again, he still leaves an impact on what a hero should be regardless of a person's shape or size that dinos can perfectly represent. And if you love this story, you are completely right in those convictions for something that went above and beyond for Disney during this era, bringing their 3D animation to the heights we know it today. I do wish I had more to say about this production, but that's all I have. Preserving the legacy of Disney's real film to be remembered and watched for years to come. And I'm all done. Goodbye.